To go along with some stories that you're going to hear later in the show, I'd like to kick things off with a bronc riding poem. This was written by S. Omar Barker, and it's titled The Riders. He claimed he'd rode the Baddens plumb from Canada on south. He'd rode 'em in the wet and he'd rode 'em in the drought. He'd rode 'em where the broncs was little and he'd rode where they was big, and he wore a lot of purties made of silver on his rig. Of course, he'd never rode before for such a little spread, but, well, if we had some broncs to bust, he'd snap a few, he said. The boss, he kind of blinked his eyes and towed a piece of ground. Of course, he said, us punchers here ain't never been around, but if your pride could stand a ride amongst a bunch of hicks, I'll hire you on. Maybe you could learn us all some tricks. The stranger's name was Buck LaRue. He wore a fancy boot, and from all his talk, you'd think he learned the hoot owl how to hoot. But Joe, the old top peeler, always kind of held his jaw. He just rode 'em as they come and never raised no big hurrah. He cut LaRue some 4-year-olds and watched him snap 'em out. This buck could fork a bronc, he said, there wasn't any doubt. But when they talked of riding in the evenings after chow, it was Buck LaRue that never failed to tell the others how. He'd say, you made a middlin' ride upon that gray today, but, Joe, I've rode 'em awful tough out Arizona way. Of course, you boys ain't been round enough to realize that these here broncs is pretty tame and kind of undersized. Well, I've forked 'em in Wyoming and the South Dakota hills where you gotta set 'em salty, or they'll jolt you to the gills. But Joe just went on riding, never putting on a show, and his spurs was never bloody, and you'd never hear him blow. Then came the day that Buck LaRue got spilt upon the ground. I guess that roan bronc hadn't heard how Buck had been around. Why, damn his soul, said Buck, and you could see it hurt his pride. This 2-bit ranch can't raise a bronc that Buck LaRue can't ride. So Buck screwed down on him once again. The roan unraveled quick, and where he throwed old Buck this time, the dust was pretty thick. The third time that he throwed him, Buck's tongue forgot to wag. Then old Joe spoke up kind of quiet. Let me try that little nag. The chances are he'll throw me, for his old Buck has often said I'm just a local rider for a little 2-bit spread. Well, Joe stepped up in the saddle, raked that roan both fore and aft, and the roan done plenty bucking, but old Joe sat up and laughed. I'm just a poor old country boy, raised weak on country chuck. I ain't never seen the elephant nor spun the world like Buck. Come on, old horse, and show me how you lay 'em on the ground, for his old Buck has often told you I ain't never been around. Well, that roan, he bucked the darndest that a country bronco could, and old Joe just sat there smiling, setting deep down in the wood. Once he done a lick of spurring as he give the boys a show, while old Buck just stood there watching with his head hung kind of low. Well, Joe rung him drive bucking like a ringer rings a shirt. Then he stepped down from the saddle looking plenty fresh and pert. He says to Buck, you take him. And he give his hat a whirl and said, in case he's still too tough for you, just give him to your girl. Now there's a moral to this story, as most of you have guessed, and it's known by most cowboys most everywhere out west. For most of us have noticed, and it's generally the case, the toughest broncs are always those you rode some other place. Howdy folks, this is Andy Hedges, and you're listening to Cowboy Crossroads. On each episode, I interview a different guest and ask them to share stories and discuss music, poetry, and culture from the working cowboy west and beyond. My guest today is Ramblin Jack Elliott. Ramblin Jack was born in Brooklyn in 1931, but ran away from home to join a rodeo when he was 14. In the 1950s, he lived and traveled with Woody Guthrie and went on to take Woody's music to Europe. Along the way, he befriended and inspired an entire generation of musicians, including Bob Dylan, Johnny Cash, and Mick Jagger. He has sung traditional cowboy songs throughout his career and has given cowboy music a home on folk music stages across the world. I sat down with Jack and his friend Rick Hasty in Elko, Nevada during the National Cowboy Poetry Gathering, and we had a great visit. There's a quote from an old bio of Jack's that sets up our interview pretty well. The quote says, "You're not likely to find Jack by looking for him. He's nowhere for long, and everyone's got different stories along the lines of when I last saw him. If he happens to run across you, don't expect to have something to say. Don't expect to talk. Listen as a warm, thick ale of a story, which will travel forward only circularly in a jigsaw logic, pours out as easily as breathing through Jack's whiskey voice." Here's Ramblin Jack Elliott.
I think Brooklyn is what made me want to be a cowboy, because I just didn't want to be in Brooklyn. I didn't see anything really that I wanted to latch onto there. I didn't play baseball. I didn't even understand or watch baseball. I probably played it with some kids at the park one day or something, but I just didn't enjoy it and didn't understand the rules of it. But I could hear the crowd yelling up there at Ebbets Field, 3 miles up Bedford Avenue from my house. You could hear 20,000, like if Pee Wee Reese hit a ball out of the park and it broke a window in the dry cleaning establishment, and you'd hear the crowd go wild, and it was like I did that for a baseball player one time in Red Dog Saloon in Virginia City, and he just loved it. He had tears coming out of his eyes. It meant a lot more to him than it ever meant to me. I just thought it was funny. He didn't think it was funny. He thought it was a piece of history, because it was like probably 1939 or something when I heard that noise. I was just a kid. And he wasn't even born yet, because he was working as a pitcher on the Reno team, and he died about a year later. He was 46. He had a heart attack and died. I visited his parents on my way here last year. Almost wished I hadn't. That's another story. We don't want to go into that. But I've had some times. I got a bat from his father. Gave me a bat that he made. He was evidently he was a fan of mine from the time he was 2.5 years old. I was like the first live music show that the kid had ever seen. He had a terrible temper. His father, I knew his father from years back. He was a disc jockey in Reno, and he'd worked as sound man nightclubs with me over in Marin County, a place called the Lion's Share. It started out in Sausalito. It ended up in San Anselmo, the Lion's Share. He told me the story one day about his little boy. This is years and years after I'd first worked those gigs in Marin. That was like going back 40 years ago. And the kid was born, about 45 years ago. Well, he just died last year. He was 46. Yeah, so it'd been 47 years ago. Yeah, a kid was born about the same time my daughter was born. That would have been... Anyway, he had a bad temper, and they took him to see me at the Ash Grove in L.A., a good folk song nightclub. Ed Pearl owned it. It was 8162 Melrose. A lot of movie actors and directors would come to see the shows there. And I met Big Mama Thornton there, and Brownie McGee and Sonny Terry played there, and Mississippi John Hurt played there, and I opened for Lightning Hopkins there one time, my first gig there. I was a day late getting there because I stopped off to have a look at the JA on the way out. That's another story. This baseball player, he had a terrible temper as a child, and they brought him to see me at the Ash Grove, back around 1969 or 70. It was back when I was hanging out with the Grateful Dead. They brought him to see me, and he saw this cowboy up on the stage with a guitar, and he left his parents' table and went right up on the stage and stood there with me. And his father wouldn't go grab him because he was afraid if he tried to grab the kid, he might wreck the Ash Grove. He had a frightening temper. 2.5 years old. It's a good thing he became a baseball pitcher. He probably would have ended up being some kind of criminal or something with all that energy. He seemed like a nice fella when I met him, but he'd been pitching for the Reno team. The kid's standing there on the stage with me, so I just serenaded him throughout the entire set, for about 45 minutes or an hour, and then he ended up getting back with his parents again. But they entertained him with the story about that adventure, as a kid and growing up. So he ends up thinking that Ramblin Jack's some kind of hero. And here I am meeting him for the first time. He's about twice my size. He's at a party at Rock Scully's house. Rock was the road manager for the Grateful Dead, and we have the same birthday. We're at this party. The baseball player was making himself a little cheese sandwich in the kitchen. I snuck up behind him and swatted him on the rump. Bam! Then I walked around the front of him, and with my best John Wayne imitation, I said, "So you're that kid, eh?" And he looked at me and laughed. He got the joke. He could have killed me. But he liked the John Wayne imitation, and he caught the joke. So we became friends. And I'm a proud owner of one of his homemade baseball bats. But I've never known anything at all about baseball. But he seemed to be duly entertained when I told him that story. It was an otherwise very dull evening in the Red Dog Saloon. I had about 14 people came to see me that night because we'd played the night before at the Opera House and had the whole town came to see me. You don't play 2 consecutive nights in the same town. Everybody saw me the first night. They didn't want to come back and see me again. And I was drinking a little bit too much. I had 2 shots of tequila, sound check, and I had another shot of tequila in the first set, and there was only about 14 people, and about 7 of them left. And there was a little gunfight out there at the end of the bar, but I didn't notice it. Nobody shot anybody. Just somebody punched somebody and took a gun away from him. That was earlier. That was before the baseball player and his mom and dad came in. But you're asking about Brooklyn. I'm a Brooklyn Dodger. That was the name of the team, the Brooklyn Dodgers. I found that they got that name. Originally they called themselves the Brooklyn Trolley Dodgers. Like dodging a trolley car as it came down the street, going to run you over. I didn't realize that until years later. Brooklyn Trolley Dodgers. I like the names of all the players and all that stuff. And they had a fellow named Red Barber. I think he came from Georgia. He had a really sweet-sounding Southern accent, and he was like narrating the game. I used to love to listen to Red Barber describing the baseball game, but I just wasn't that interested in baseball. I just liked his voice, though.
You told me a story on the phone the other night about this cowboy that you met. You ran off maybe when you were...
the first time. Yeah, he rode right down Linden Boulevard. I was sleeping. It was early in the morning, about 5:30 or so. I hear I hear hoofbeats coming down the street. And no wagon wheels. I thought, well, that's odd. At first I thought it was the milk wagon, because we had horse-drawn milk wagons and horse-drawn vegetable farmers would come in from outer Long Island and sell vegetables off a horse-drawn wagon. I think they called them truck farms. And they had people that came down a horse-drawn wagon sharpening scissors and sharpening knives. Knife sharpening guys. And then there were other people that collected junk and stuff like that with horse wagons. And there was plenty of horse manure on the street back then. They had regular paid street sweepers with brooms and shovels just paid to go around and sweep up the horse manure off the streets as a regular thing when I was a kid. That was 1940. I think it was 45 when I saw that cowboy riding down the street, and no wheels, no wagon. When I didn't hear the wheels, I realized it must be a horse, so I jumped out of bed, ran over to the window, looked out, looked down. I see this cowboy looked like he was right out of a Will James book, sitting his horse in a comfortable style. I got dressed, ran down the stairs, got on my bicycle, and caught up with him in about a block or two up Linden Boulevard, and I rode alongside of him for about 3 or 4 miles. Interviewed him. He said he rode that horse all the way from Montana. His name was Tiny Westley, and the horse's name was Shorty. And he told me where he's going. He was going out to some riding stable out in Long Island. He lived out there in a place called Flushing, Long Island. That's the home of the Lane Lifeboat and Davit Company, by the way, on Flushing Bay. I said that to Rick here because he's a professional boat skipper. He knows what I'm talking about. You remember Charlie Parker, the boat builder? I was working with Charlie helping to build some little 12-foot flat-bottom skiffs. And they were a sail-equipped boat, but I don't think they had a centerboard in them. But had a rudder, a mast, and a little sail. And they were about 12 feet long, made out of plywood. And Charlie had a dog named Mate. And Mate was a real saltwater boatyard dog. He knew port from starboard. He knew all the words to Old Shep. I would sing Old Shep, and he'd be mouthing the words with me while I sang. He was part Australian Shepherd and part something else. You know those African dogs that have got long ears and long hair? They use them from lion hunting. You wouldn't think a dog like that would be a lion hunter because they look more like something out of Vogue magazine. Well, anyway, that dog Mate, he knew all the words to the South Coast, and he knew all the words to Old Shep. And I had a gig to play in the oldest bar west of the Mississippi River. It's out in Bolinas. Bolinas is a mythical community about south of me, down there in West Marin. They claim to be the oldest bar west of the Mississippi River. Smiley's Schooner Bar. It seems like a knife fight is just about to begin as you walk in. And they had a shark in a tank in the back. He was a little shark, about 4 foot long. And they had a grouper that was about 5 feet long. I made the grouper smile. I don't know what song it was that he liked. Groupers don't smile much. They go around sort of down in the mouth. Well, anyway, I was getting ready to sing Old Shep, Mate's favorite song. And when he heard the opening strains, of the introduction for Old Shep, dun-dun-dun-dun, dun-dun-dun, he'd give everybody the evil eye in the audience and say, "Anybody that talks during this song will be bitten." And then I would continue. Brooklyn. Well, that cowboy, that was the first day of my sophomore year. It was September of 1945. I got ready for school. I got back to the house, went to school. I'd been riding with that cowboy for about an hour. But that bicycle ride alongside that cowboy really put a big change in my life. And of course, my father's nurse, Mrs. Malone, Catherine, a beautiful blonde lady from Minnesota, she knew that I was kind of cowboy crazy. She gave me a copy of Lone Cowboy, My Life Story by Will James for Christmas when I was 12. I'd been going to the rodeo at Madison Square Garden since I was 9. And here I am, I'm 14 now, and I met that cowboy. When I was 15, I ended up running away from home, really, and disappeared for about 3 months. Ended up traveling on the J.E. Ranch Rodeo, a traveling rodeo, grooming horses for $2 a day. The man that hired me decided to call me Pancho, after a clown that, I think he went by the name of Pancho Villa. And he used to drink wine and let the bulls, he was a bullfighting clown, he'd let the bulls throw him up in the air. And I said, I've got a picture postcard photograph of Pancho upside down. He's about 10 feet up in the air, and there's a big Bremer bull looking up at him. Found that thing at the old J.E. Ranch in Waverly, New York, many years later. Rick, that's East Coast Rick. I'm with West Coast Rick here. This is Rick Hasty. Rick Robbins was with me. We were going to deliver my first motorhome to Montana. It was wore out, and I bought a new motorhome and left the new motorhome in Jackson, Wyoming, and flew back east and got the old motorhome that was on a farm in Uncasville, Connecticut, where my dad was born. My dad's father, my grandfather, had cattle. I don't know if he had any beef cattle. They were milk, but I remember visiting Grandpa with my dad when I was about 5, and we got run out of a pasture by a mad bull. That may be the reason why I wanted to be a cowboy. I don't know. But my dad always talked sentimentally about growing up on a farm. Because I grew up in the city, of course. Rarely had a chance to get out in the country and get on a farm, but we were always going to buy a place in the country, get a farm. Uncle Joe was the closest thing we had to a cowboy. He rode with Teddy Roosevelt. He was in a group called the Rough Riders. He had a farm up in Connecticut on Preston City Pond, or Lake Amos. Lake Amos is about 4 miles long and about a half a mile deep. I think they measured it one time. They had a barge from the Navy Underwater Sound Lab in New London. This is only a few miles up the river from New London. And they sent this barge up there and put it on Lake Amos, and they were taking soundings. I think they found out that Lake Amos was 800 feet deep. They thought it was a volcano crater. And Uncle Joe's farm was up there. He had 3,000 chickens, 1 wife, and 1 dog. Dog's name was Daisy May. And he had a horse called Chubby. He looked like a quarter horse. He was a cow pony looking horse. And Chubby got stung by a bee and ran through a barbed wire fence, and that was the end of Chubby. Daisy May lived a long time. And Uncle Joe and Aunt Ida. I think Joe was worried about me because I used to talk a lot. He never talked at all. He couldn't shut me up.
In the 1940s, Jack rode some broncs and rodeos, and he can remember the name of every bronc he ever rode and the detail of every ride. I should mention that in this next section, a smoke alarm went off in the middle of the interview. I could have edited that out, but I loved Jack's response so much, I decided to leave some of it in.
And then I was almost a teenager, but we didn't have teenagers back then. They didn't have the concept. I didn't know I was a teenager the first time I tried to ride a bucking horse. I was 18 years old. I thought I was a young human being. I didn't know I was a teenager. I shook hands with Casey Tibbs. I said, "My name's Pancho." I'd already been rodeoing by that time. I was 18, because I was 15 when I ran away and joined the J.E. Ranch Rodeo. I'd been hanging out with cowboys for, 47, 48, 49. It's 1949. Casey had just been getting ready to win world champion saddle bronc rider for the first time in his life. And he won it at the end of that rodeo, and this was at the beginning of that month. So it was approximately 3 or 4 weeks before Casey won the world for the first time. But he'd been winning bronc riding since he was 12 years old. He was 19 and I was 18. That's 1949. I said, "My name's Pancho." He says, "My name's Casey. Let me know if there's anything I can do to help you out." I didn't realize they were having a joke. I found out later Casey is a very fierce and dangerous jokester. He likes to do practical jokes, and life and limb mean nothing. You're on your own. You don't want to walk too close to that guy. He's dangerous. And he looks so innocent. Got them cute smile, curly hair, hat on the back of his head, purple shirt, purple chaps, purple scarf, black hat. He modeled for Lee Ryder jeans.
I don't know what that is.
Come in. Who is it? That's a smoke alarm.
Is it? Some kind of alarm.
Somebody lit a cigarette. We're being followed.
It's a bullshit alarm.
Bullshit alarm. That's what that is. The bullshit alarm.
Good bullshit.
We got to stop the interview. Stop the interview.
It would have gone off already.
No, but there's a difference. You need to tell them.
Let's get it.
Well, there's good bullshit and there's bad bullshit.
He's made a living off of good bullshit.
I'm a professional bullshit artist.
Well, tell me more about that. What was the prank that Casey was trying to play on you?
Well, I wanted to learn how to ride saddle broncs, and they said that they had some broncs that people had drawed in the bronc riding. They fold up and they write the name of a horse on a piece of paper, fold it up, put it in a hat, and there's this hat full of pieces of paper, the names of all the horses that are people going to ride that day. All the day's horses are in the hat. And you sort of look away and reach in the hat and pull out a piece of paper and open it up, and that's who you're going to ride. That's the way they pick who gets to ride. It's called the luck of the draw. Well, if they draw a horse, these are guys from all over the West that paid a lot of money to get to New York, paid a lot of money for entry fees. They're staying in a hotel, maybe sleeping 5 in one room, 2 and 3 in a bed. But they're going to try to win some money at that Madison Square Garden rodeo, and most of those guys they're local champs from all over the West, been winning a buckle here and then winning $100 there and saving up their money and going to New York. And it's a 1-month rodeo, 4 weeks, September 23rd to October 24th, or thereabouts. Most rodeos are like 2-3 days. And if they draw a horse that can't buck well enough to really win a lot of money on him, because you have to be in the 5 top best rides of the day. They might have 15 guys a day riding broncs in a rodeo, and then they'll change events. They'll do something else, calf rope and bulldog and whatever. So you get to see about 10 or 15 guys over a period of 45 minutes or an hour, and then they'll do something else because they don't want to bore the audience. That's showbiz. And they put on a hell of a show in New York. That was a great rodeo. No wasted time. When you got to be ready to come out of that gate when the announcer calls your name. So they draw a horse that they can't win money on. They might pay some kid like me, some gunsel, to just ride him out, and the announcer says your name because you drew the horse. They'll say that was Jim Shoulders on a horse called Hell's Angel or something like that, and it wasn't Jim, it was just some kid. And didn't ride very well either, but Jim got that way he didn't have to risk riding a horse that he couldn't win money on. It's cheating in a way. It's not exactly a very honest thing to do, but they do that, and that's one way that a kid could get a chance to learn to ride, get some experience. So I was going to make $10 a head riding bucking horse. This is my first try. I know you got to find out how the horse goes. So I started asking around. I looked in the chute. He looked pretty big. I said, "How does this horse go?" They said, "We don't know. We bought him last week in Fort Madison, Iowa. The horse was sick at the time." I believed them. I had no idea that anyone would want to kill me. They're going to pay me $10. And they all seemed to be, willing to help. I climbed over, got on the saddle. It was a company saddle they loaned me. 2 different size stirrups. And the left one was a little bit smaller than the right one, and there was chewing gum on these stirrups. So you don't lose a stirrup. That's cheating once again. Some guys do that. They hope that the judges didn't notice. Put chewing gum on the stirrup. Because if you blow a stirrup, you're disqualified. You get a goose egg, 0. No money. So I got my feet in the stirrup, and they adjusted the stirrups for length, with the buckle and all, with their hands through the slats of the chute, and they're helping me. Got all that done. Showed me how much rein to give him. They hold the bronc rein back past the saddle horn. These old bronc saddles in those days had a horn on them. Modern day rodeo contest bronc riding saddles don't have a horn. Too many guys got killed. Horse go over backwards, a horse goes right through your sternum. Horn. They hold that rein back towards the saddle and measure a certain known distance or some kind of a mystical number of hand measurement from the saddle horn forward, like 2.5 hands or whatever. Take some hair out of the horse's mane and poke it through the braided rope bronc rein. It's a single 4-strand braided rope rein. Poke some hair through there as a marker. That's where you grab it and hold on when the time comes, because you don't have much time once they call your name and you got to get on in a hurry. So you mark the place where you want to take the rein. How do they know that? They never saw the horse go. Does he stick his head out? Does he? Oh, I don't know. It's a science. Got that done. Now I'm got off the saddle. I see Casey Tibbs all strutting around in front of the chutes there like God or somebody. I thought, oh, there's Casey Tibbs. I'd been watching him for the last couple of years. He was winning and winning. Great bronc rider. I believe I'll go down and say hello. So I didn't want to climb over my horse because he might spook. Nobody knew what he might do. So I climbed over my neighbor's horse, which was a very tame bronc. He looked like he was asleep in the chute, waiting for somebody to get on and ride him. I climbed over that chute, dropped down to the ground as Casey comes strutting by, and introduced myself. I said, "My name's Pancho." He says, "My name's Casey. Let me know if there's anything I can do to help you out." And I thought, wow. And I just shook hands with God. I can now ride anything. And I climbed right back over that tame horse in chute number 3 and went up to my horse in chute number 2 and waited till they told me to get on. The time came. I got on, quick and careful. Got both feet in the stirrups. They're helping me put my feet in the stirrups. Grabbed that rein where the marker was, from the horse's mane. Held it up in front of me, away from the saddle. You can't touch the saddle. You'll be disqualified. Your hands are up there away from the horse. You can't touch the horse or saddle. "Are you ready?" I said, "Yeah." The gate opened. Out he came. I thought he was going to head for the middle of the arena. They mostly do that, and I'm sort of looking toward the middle of the arena because that's probably where he's going to go. But he went into a tight left-hand turn and never stopped spinning. He did a left-hand spin. I flew off immediately to the right from centrifugal force. My left foot was stuck in the stirrup with the chewing gum. I couldn't get my foot out of the stirrup. I'm horizontal. I'm like the blade of a helicopter. I go around about 3 complete round turns in 1 second, and then my boot flew off from centrifugal force. I dropped to the ground right underneath him, and he stepped on me, oh, so gently, on my inside of my right thigh, put a great big hoof print on my leg, tore my pants on the left side. But he didn't hurt me. And they picked me up, dusted me off, handed me my glasses and my hat, which had been on the ground. Oh, I didn't wear glasses on the horse. I gave them to somebody the last minute. And it was Howard McCrory, the arena policeman, who dusted me off, handed me my hat, and said, "Good try, kid." And I thought, what marvelous, kind people. They're teaching me how to ride. This is great. I can't wait to get on another one. And I walked just like a real bronc rider for about a week after that with my almost broken leg. And that was my first attempted bronc ride. But it took me 74 years to realize that Casey was having a joke on me. They weren't just trying to teach me how to ride bucking horses. They're going to get this New York kid killed in a very spectacular way, and it would have been interesting. I heard the echo of the crowd gasping. I heard it for weeks afterward. But one of them good bronc riders, who was a kind gentleman named Wallace Brooks, his elder brother, Lewis Brooks, was a former world champion before Casey Tibbs. He was a world champion about around 1946 or 47. Wallace Brooks' elder brother. And I went with Wallace one day to buy a Cadillac up there in some 59th Street. He got a Cadillac that matched his hair, platinum blonde. Well, Wallace told me that he drew that horse, that first horse of mine. His name was Pennywise. He was Pennywise, and I was pound foolish. He says, I drew that horse in the next go-around, Pancho. They called me Pancho. That was kind to them. They could have called me a lot of other things. He said the horse spun so fast with him, he fell down, he got a re-ride. He said, "I think that's the fastest spinning horse I've ever seen." And I've recently found there is a museum of old bucking horses in Texas. They mailed me some photographs of Pennywise and the second horse that I got on, which was a horse called Little Tyee, and the third and last horse, Y Bar Me, big black horse, had a Y Bar brand on his hip. and they said it was Bill Linderman on him. I think Bill was embarrassed because I only rode the horse about 4 jumps, but I was getting better. I was learning how. I fell off, landed on my head, blew all the wind out of my lungs. Took me about 5 minutes to get the air back in my lungs, but I was okay. I wasn't hurt. I was 18 years old, but I didn't know I was a teenager.
All right, folks, that's it for this episode. I'll pick up on the next episode with part 2 of my interview with Jack. I'd like to thank Ramblin Jack Elliott for taking the time to visit with me. You can find out more about Jack at ramblinjack.com. You can find out more about me and this show at andyhedges.com. If you've enjoyed this show and would like to support it, you can leave a tip on the website, or you could leave a review on the iTunes store, or you could tell a friend about the show and encourage them to give it a listen. If you'd like to contact me with a question or a comment, I'd love to hear from you. You can send me an email at andy@andyhedges.com. Thank you for listening to Cowboy Crossroads.